Welcome everyone to the Lofi Poli Sci podcast. I'm your host, Michael Pickering. That's right, Lo-Fi as in low fidelity, low quality, in your face, messy as can be global news show. And today, my friends, the beginning of our new segment, Connecting the Dots. Here, we're going to bring up stories that we covered exactly a year ago on the show and talk about them today and how they're really relevant to connecting the dots with one very specific purpose: to predict what's going on in the world tomorrow. Oh, I know we're getting into the fortune-telling business now. How exciting. Just think, next year, we can come back and see if we were right. What a thought. Well, let's hit it. First, a year ago today, we talked about the attempted peace deal between the Taliban and the Afghan government and the U.S. and how they were threatening to pull $1 billion in aid from the country if they didn't come together. Number two, we talked about a year ago how jihadist attacks in the country of Mozambique, they took control of an entire town. Number three, we also talked about Israeli elections that just took place and how a new power-sharing arrangement was being crafted in order to help the government form a coalition government to keep moving forward. And number four, we also talked about Turkey charging 20 Saudi Arabians over the killing of U.S. resident/journalist and Saudi Arabian national Jamal Khashoggi. Now today, we're going to just stick to these four. Remember, we can't throw all them dots on the table at once. At least not yet. But we'll update them, add to them, discuss over the relevant issues to them. And then, we're going to connect all these dots from a year ago to today and see how they're connected to do some projections on what these dots got going on tomorrow. So first up, Afghanistan. What's happening since the U.S. threat of cutting funding, and where are the peace talks? Well, at the moment, it doesn't seem the peace talks are even on the big agenda for the Taliban and the Afghan government. The major issue? The U.S. pulling their military out of the country. There is a May 1st deadline for the U.S. and all NATO and international troops to leave the country. And the Taliban? They want that deadline to be honored, and they are making some major threats if it isn't honored. And we're not going down the rabbit hole, though. We got to keep to the larger picture. And the larger picture seems to be, after the past year and all the time since the early 2000s when Afghanistan was invaded and the Taliban was overthrown, it seems we're really close to seeing a conclusion to the Afghan invasion. And with or without a peace agreement between the government and the Taliban, they're about to be on their own to figure things out. It appears, at least. So we'll have to leave that dot hanging just right there and jump to our second one. And that brings us to an entire town in Mozambique that was taken over by a group named Al-Shabaab, potentially connected to the terrorist group of the same name in Ethiopia, but sometimes it's harder than just looking at a name to decide if these groups are connected. Regardless, big picture, terrorist groups were still quite active a year ago and quite powerful. Yesterday, we talked about the Islamic State of the Greater Sahara and Niger, attacking 3 towns and killing 137 people. Almost exactly a year after the Mozambique incident. Now, before we go any further, we do have to say, Mozambique and Niger are nowhere near each other on the continent of Africa. Take a quick look at a map. Mozambique is in the far southeast, and Niger is in the northwest, and there is a ton of Africa between these two. The point of these two dots' connection is that after a year, and really much longer, but after these events being a year apart, we still see very active terrorist groups in Africa, and from the south of the continent to the west of the continent, and in theory, and in many cases well established, that these groups have links to terrorist groups elsewhere. The bigger picture and bigger dot, terrorist groups with ties to ISIS and Al-Qaeda are still quite strong across Africa. So keep hold of that dot for a second. Now, dot number 3. Israeli elections a year ago and power-sharing arrangements to create a coalition government so the state of Israel could function efficiently. The update. The exact same thing seems to be happening right now. A new election took place on Tuesday. The results are still being counted and confirmed, but it very much appears that at the time of the publishing of this episode, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will fall short of having a majority and will have to form another coalition government, and very well may be forced into another quite fragile power-sharing arrangement. Like really, Lo-Fi Nation, if people ever think history repeats itself, This is surely a case of it. And last year, we also talked about the corruption charges being brought against the Prime Minister. Now, that trial is underway. The bigger picture of this dot: the government of Israel seems to be just as fragile as a year ago, and in almost the exact same situation as a year ago, with the addition that the Prime Minister's corruption trial has begun. So fragile and uncertain is the outcome of this dot, which is very important as far as the development. So hang on to that dot for a second while we go to our last one. Our fourth dot: Turkey charged 20 Saudi Arabians for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Okay, what's the update here? Well, of course, Saudi Arabia says it was rogue agents, and they put those people on trial, and it was finished, for their part. But U.S. intelligence agencies have recently and directly now come out and say the Saudi crown prince, basically the leader of the country, Mohammed bin Salman, was directly responsible for the murder. They point blank said, the leader of Saudi Arabia, you ordered the murder of a U.S. resident to be done in an embassy in Turkey. A huge violation of international law, to say the least. Saudi Arabia is a big U.S. ally in the Middle East. This all looms large over future U.S.-Saudi collaborations in the region. That's a dot for you to hang on to. But now, let's take these 8 dots from a year ago and from today, put them all together, and see what the future holds. Let's see. What do the data tell us? Dots number 1 and number 2. The West is about to be out of Afghanistan, and there is no sign of a peace agreement for when foreign militaries leave. Meaning, there's the possibility of a huge struggle for power in the country once that happens, and therefore greater instability in the country and the region. And let me tell you, there's already a lot of instability there. Dots number 3 and number 4 provide us with the evidence that terrorist networks that have links in the Middle East are still active and tragically powerful in Africa. Dots number 5 and number 6 tell us that Israel, a country that is active in the fight against terrorism across the Middle East, is very much in a perpetual state of fragility and uncertainty, especially surrounding the future outcome of the Prime Minister. Dots number 7 and number 8 tell us that a longtime U.S. ally in the Middle East that also helps fight specific terrorist groups, that relation is being strained and cooperation in the future has a massive question mark over it. And take these 8 dots together, they all sadly line up in the same direction and point to the same thing. Over the next year, if these dots keep going the way they are, and the way they have been for even longer than a year, that over the next year, we'll see a decrease in collaboration and countries' abilities to coordinate military strategies against terrorism. We'll see an increase in instability in the region, and an increase in terrorist attacks and terrorist groups' power reaching from the eastern edge of the Middle East all the way through Africa. All the data say that unless some major things change, things are about to get a whole lot worse the next year for the Middle East and Africa. Which means things will get a whole lot worse for the entire world. Now, I understand this isn't something any of us want to hear. Trust me, I don't want to be here telling you that things are about to get worse. But this is what the data tell us. This is the writing on the wall. However, just because all indications lead to grim implications does not mean it will be so. One of the beautiful things about political science and what we do, what you are doing here with me right now, Lofi Nation. Political science looks at the relevant variables across the world, the trends in the data, and predicts likely outcomes. And regardless from what some other people may say or think, we're actually pretty damn good at it. But the beautiful thing about what we are doing here, being able to do what we just did, being able to see the writing on the wall of what's to come, it provides us the opportunity to change things before that grim future takes place. It gives us not only the possibility of hope, but it provides us the knowledge of what specific variables we would need to change in order to keep more tragedies from happening. What we do here, Lo-Fi listener out there, is we create the possibility for a better future and for positive change in the world. And that, my friends, is connecting the dots. If you want to get our new written publication, get at me. We drop the first issue on Saturday. Do you have a top 10 list idea? Get at me. Do you have good news to share? Share it with us. Interested in being a co-host? Interested in the Flashcast, live stream, episode takeovers? Always remember that Lofi Poli Sci is more than just me. It's the we that we be. Peace and well-being to all my human beings out there. Much love and always the best. Pickering, signing off.